Leadership is not just tested by conflict and having to make big decisions and having to manage your portfolio and having to run your finances and having to all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It's primarily tested by the pressures that come with all of our responsibilities. And when stress goes unprocessed, it does not magically disappear. It leaks out through our communication, sometimes manic urgency, and very often creates unintended consequences. Your stress becomes the atmosphere that your team absorbs. And we like to say it this way: if you don't own your stress will own you. Mic drop, bam, boom. Come on. Now we're talking. Now we're talking real time. Let's go. Real talk. Oh, it's still me.
Please keep talking.
I know. I just love this stuff. My brain started going. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is my life. We all experience pressure. Life and leadership is pressure. And let me just pause here and just say this. And for that reason, like, we're all in this together. Nobody's immune to the stresses that come with the pressures of life and leadership at every level, right? The difference is how we respond to it, how we navigate it. When we don't have an intentional way to process our stress, we will internalize it, we will transmit it, and usually both.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where the Kairos circle becomes essential, one of our core leadership tools. It gives us permission to pause, to reset, and to lead forward with greater intentionality and purpose.
That's right. And I just want to pause and remind our listeners that you can go back to season 1 and listen to the episode that's a deep dive on the Kairos circle. Today, we just want to give you a vision for how you can use this tool very practically next time you feel that stress building, because this is a reality that we all experience, right? We have experienced the stress spiral. We've seen the stress spiral in our clients, our leaders that we work with. And the reality is, in those moments when stress rises, oftentimes we think we're managing it well. We think we're not doing anything wrong.
Guilty.
Yeah. But the reality is, just our energy, our presence in that space when we're operating with that frenetic stress energy, it is sensed in the room. Your team experiences it. As you said, it's the atmosphere that they're living in.
Mm-hmm.
So help us understand, Eric, why is it so hard for us to recognize what's going on internally there when we think we're leading well under stress, but in reality, it's leaking out all over the place?
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, we're guilty of it. All the leaders we work with are guilty of it.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, the number of meetings, I've sat in on with clients, and nowadays, with all of the advances in understanding of science and our biology, we know that we're basically just a big ball of energy. And so, think of different frequencies when we're coming into any space and we're operating out of a high stressed frequency. It's like, it's just, there's this kind of almost this controlled chaos going on internally for us. And that energy naturally transmits to the people around us, right? One of my favorite comics that I used to read when I was young, I know comics aren't really a big thing anymore, but was Calvin and Hobbes.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And in this one little comic strip, Calvin's in a terrible mood and he's standing on the street corner waiting for the bus to pick him up to take him to school. And, and he's just sitting there, he's smoldering in his stress and frustration. And, so he's carrying that kind of frequency. And then his friend, this girl, comes to the street corner to wait with him to get on the bus. And she's all cheery and happy and excited. And so she's operating with a totally different frequency. And what happens is, after a few, snippets, all of a sudden now she's in the same place that he is, right? She's upset and frustrated and stressed. It's this beautiful picture of how we as human beings don't realize or we're not paying attention to the frequency with which we're operating, right? The energy that emits from us based on the attitudes that we are carrying internally. right? And that's why we say, if you don't own stress, it will own us, and it will cause us to operate in ways that are unhelpful to our environment, right? And I think as leaders, there's this expectation that I think more than anything else we put on ourselves, that we've just got to push through. We've got to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. We've got to muscle through. We develop coping mechanisms so that we can get on to the next task, the next responsibility, the next meeting, the next call, the next whatever it is that we have to do. And then it's not just at work. Then we go from work to home and home to work, and then to whatever things we're doing with our friends. And the energy just continues in that same vein. But when stress goes unprocessed, it shapes every interaction.
Yeah.
And denial doesn't change anything.
Doesn't fix it.
Doesn't fix it.
Shoot.
Right? Neither does ignoring it. Neither does avoiding it. Neither does pretending like it's not there. We can find ourselves snapping in meetings. We can find ourselves starting to bulldog timelines. We start shutting down input from others. We can start micromanaging, not because we're bad leaders, but because we're overloaded. And there's unprocessed stress that we're carrying. And without owning and processing the stress that we're experiencing, that pressure gets transmitted. We pass it on, right? We call this the negative form of paying it forward. I feel stressed, and therefore I'm going to transmit this stress, this energy, into the relationships and the conversations and the emails and the texts, without even realizing a lot of times.
That's right.
Until other people now are absorbing it and now are drawn into that same atmosphere. It's like oxygen in the room. Like, you know, if it's toxic oxygen air, then everybody's going to be impacted by it. So what is it that we're bringing into any space? I think is a really powerful question. Now here's the point that we want to drive at. That stress isn't a sign of weakness. Stress is a normal part of human life. But when stress builds and when it's unprocessed, that's when it becomes a problem. So what if we could see these experiences of stress, instead of as signs of weakness and something to be avoided or ashamed of, what if we could see them instead as signals or indicators that something's going on internally for us? We've been disrupted. The question is, will we ignore these indicators, or will we use them to our benefit?
That's right. Yes, because it is something that we are all going to experience. There is no escaping it. The reality is, as leaders, as humans in our life, we experience pressures and stress on a daily basis. So that's why this tool for us is so important, because as you mentioned, we can employ coping mechanisms, but they're only going to get us so far. They're only going to work for so long.
Mm-hmm.
But it's same with numbing techniques, right? We can employ all sorts of unhelpful numbing techniques to help take that edge off, so to speak, but they're only effective, and they're not ever truly effective, but they only get us through for so long.
Yeah.
So what would it look like then, Eric, for us to engage this stress, this pressure in a healthy way? How can we use it, as you said, instead of just leaking it out into our...
Yeah. Well, let me throw out this analogy, and you can push back if it doesn't work. I'm going to try this out real time right now.
Oh, okay.
As a former athlete, I was a collegiate athlete as well. One of the things that I really appreciated was how much we trained or practiced in preparation for game time.
Mm-hmm.
And as a collegiate soccer player, we ran a ton. We did wind sprints, and we did long distance running, and we did weight training, and we did all kinds of different things. And all of it was to increase our capacity, our bandwidth, so that come game time, we were able to go longer than our competitors. And so what we're talking about right now is, for us as leaders, I think it's important to think of it as, how do we practice processing our stress so that our capacity to operate under even greater pressure increases? I would dare say that the real measure of leadership is how much pressure can we operate under and still bring the best version of us to that space. right? But the only way we grow our capacity is by stretching our capacity to push beyond our comfort zone. So for any of our listeners, like, this is what I take solace in when I'm under a lot of stress. I'm under a lot of pressure, because stress comes with the pressure, right? Oftentimes I can see that as a negative. Like, why is this happening to me? This sucks. Like, how do I get out of this? How do I escape this? Right. Which then leads to those numbing coping mechanisms that I'm all too familiar with. What if we saw them instead as opportunity? This is practice. This is training. This is an opportunity for me to increase my capacity. But how do I practice well to increase that capacity? So this is where this tool, the Kairos circle, and that we're going to unpack basically the principles of this tool and how we can leverage them in our lives. First and foremost, the Kairos circle provides for us a reset pattern, right? So that's why we teach leaders to use the Kairos circle, especially in high stress moments. So we start by asking, what's triggering me, or what is stressing me out right now? In other words, what's the indicator, right? Just like when we're driving in our cars, like we have the indicators on the dashboard letting us know, hey, something's going on in the car that you can't see. We got to learn how to pay attention to those moments, right? Giving ourselves permission to pause and recognize, I'm feeling stressed, right? Paying attention to kind of our mental state of being, our emotional state of being, or even our physical state of being, right? And anything that feels disruptive is an indicator I'm under stress. Okay, that's just an indicator. Doesn't mean I'm a bad leader. I need to pay attention to this, right? And then processing through that stress to ask the question, not only why do I feel this stress, but what is the narrative that I'm kind of entertaining right now? Because for most of us, we either want to blame ourselves, blame other people, condemn ourselves, condemn other people, right? Which is just an escape mechanism. It's just a coping mechanism, rather than really owning, why am I so stressed, and what is the story or the narrative I'm telling myself? And then to give ourselves the opportunity, what does the best version of me do, or how does the best version of me respond in a situation like this? That is, in my estimation, like the $64 million question that we have trained leaders in, that so many people have come back and said, Eric, that is one of the most helpful questions that I now use whenever I'm feeling stressed, and I start processing that stress. It's simply to disrupt those old patterns, old coping mechanisms, old attitudes and behaviors. I simply ask myself, what does the best version of me look like in this situation? And when we do that, we're giving ourselves permission not only to disrupt those old patterns, those old defaults that could lead to unhealthy engagements or negative frequencies, but it gives us a chance to choose how we want to show up, to choose it. It's no different than when I was in, college, and we're doing these wind sprints, and I'm like, I'm going to die. No human being should have to run this much. Right. But the reason I have that narrative is, my coach hates me. This is unfair. The narrative is really because I'm being pressed up against my capacity. I'm stretching into an area of discomfort, and it feels a little scary.
Yeah.
And in those moments, right, our coach would say, he'd say, what kind of team do you want to be? How do you want to show up game time? Do you want to have a competitive advantage over the team we're playing against? Do you want to achieve the goals that we set out to achieve this year? Do you want to perform the best in your position? Do you want to be a greater asset to your team? All those questions were encouraging us to dig deep and to ask, what is the best version of me in this situation? How does the best version of me want to show up in this situation? Which meant it gave me the motivation to press into that discomfort, right? And which expanded my capacity. And I think that's the same thing we're talking about here is what does the best version of me look like? And that gives me an opportunity to choose, and choosing the better version of me is actually part of what expands my capacity.
Yeah. I want to kind of, as you like to say, double click on something that you said, because that idea that we can choose how we're going to show up is, in our estimation, what leads people to freedom. Because so often people feel like, and it's true, we have developed default responses to stress and pressure in our life to the point that it doesn't feel like we have a choice.
That's right. We become victims,
Yes.
right? Or we become the villain, we like to say, where now we're just trying to control everything around us. It's either a pity party or we become hyper aggressive and controlling. But either one of those is really, like you're saying, kind of an internal prison that we're holding ourselves in.
That's right. And it feels out of our control, that like our response feels out of our control. And this tool, this process is kind of that key that can unlock the prison for you, because it, when you start to experience it, instead of saying this is out of my control, it literally gives us a path that we can walk down to regain control and put the best version of ourselves back in the driver's seat. It's a game changer.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. It's really interesting because what we're essentially inviting ourselves, our listeners, our clients into all the time is a paradigm shift where we move from seeing life happening to us to life happening for us. And all of a sudden, the pressures and stresses of life become opportunity rather than obstacles. And that's the pathway that leads to greater freedom. Because we realize, wow, I'm the only person who can be in control of my attitudes and behaviors. I'm the only person who can choose how I'm going to show up in the midst of distress. I'm the only person who can choose how I process and navigate what my internal world. The world doesn't get to choose that for me. And that's the freedom we're talking about.
That's right. Well, let me share a recent example of how I used this.
Please.
Real time. So a couple weeks ago, as our listeners are well aware of, we have a podcast. You're listening to it right now. I am in charge of basically writing the podcast episodes. We riff off from there, but I provide the structure. And a few weeks ago, I brought the podcast structure as I normally do. You and I were talking through it, Eric, and I started to have this oh shit moment where I was like, now that we're walking through this doesn't feel as good as it did when I wrote it. Like when I wrote it, I was like, okay, yeah. And now like a couple days later that we're processing it together, this isn't working. And I'm getting a sense of that. You were getting a sense of that. You were trying to jump in and start making some edits. And what happened in that moment was the stress started crushing in on me. And you didn't know because I was sitting here nodding along. But my internal experience was that I was starting to respond to old stories. I was starting to pull out truths that I have learned from other experiences where my lack of perfection disqualifies me from participation.
Okay, hold on. Let's just, before you continue the story, that's worth double clicking on. Like, explain that for a second, because I think we all probably experience this, but you're putting language to something that I think we all struggle with. So when we're face to face with something that we didn't do to a certain standard, say that again.
Yeah, I mean, as probably many of our leaders can appreciate, I am a driven, leader that likes to be a high performer. And when I don't live up to my own standard, I have a sense that my lack of perfection disqualifies me from participation.
Wow.
And that comes from a lot of story. I grew up, my previous experience was in a very male dominated space where I constantly had to fight for my right to exist there. And so that developed, well, one, it developed grit, which I'm appreciative for, but it also developed this narrative that anytime that I am less than perfect, it is feeding the narrative that those people that think I don't belong here already have. I'm just giving them fuel for that fire. So all of this now is crashing in on me as we are processing this podcast that is going to plan, right? I start to feel internally hijacked. I'm not listening a lick to what you're saying. You're like clicking along and trying to fix it and make it usable and doable. And in that moment, I just said, hey, Eric, we need to pause for a second.
I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah. I said, I'm feeling really hijacked in this moment because I just want to recognize and own that this isn't my best work. And that's making me feel certain ways, right? I didn't go into,
Yeah.
I didn't unpack all of this for us. Um, and what that allowed was for you then to have just a dose of empathy of like, oh, that's what you're experiencing. Well, that like, we're going to work out a plan together. We don't need to go down this like hijacking and you're disqualified from participation pathway. We're just going to partner together and find a solution for how we can,
Yeah.
direct this podcast
So,
outline.
what you're saying is I led really well in that
You
situation.
led really well. They knew you were not stressed. And what you said, I still remember. You were like, I appreciate that. But that's okay. This is fine. We can work with what we have here and we're going to find a path forward. And we did. And the simple opportunity that I gave myself in that moment to pause, to disrupt the well-worn paths that my brain likes to go down, to own that reality for myself, that that's what I was experiencing. And that like that disruption created a different outcome.
Wow.
I was able to choose a different path.
Yeah. Yeah. And as somebody who was with you in that moment, I remember experiencing it. I didn't know to what depth you were experiencing because we didn't have a chance to process after the fact. But I remember the experience of feeling like, oh, all of a sudden we shifted. We found a path that we wanted to go down for that episode. And it was awesome. It was a great experience. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think afterwards we even reflected, you sent me a voice note and you're like, that was so much fun.
Yeah.
Like that episode went great. So we literally changed the outcome of the experience that I was having. Where we could have headed was totally different than where we ended because of that.
Yeah, because if you had not known how to recalibrate or reset in that moment, it could have led you into a space where you just shut down, and then you would not have brought the better version of yourself to that space. Which, quite frankly, let's be honest, like I know those moments where I'm in a situation, I'm feeling under pressure, I'm stressed. It drives insecurity for me. And I start to get paralyzed. I start to second guess myself. And what I'm doing, I start to withhold what I should be bringing to any situation because I'm just so stuck in myself in that moment, right? Where I become a taker instead of a giver. Like that's what's at stake here.
Yeah.
Is we start becoming takers. We're going to take from our environment something to make us feel better about ourselves. We're more secure. And I call that outside in living. Right now, I'm going to make the world around me responsible to make me feel more secure, me feel better, me feel qualified, and me feel, competent, me feel valued, rather than doing the hard work like you did to reset internally, to battle those old, kind of natural default ways of thinking, and to choose the version of you wanted to be, which is just it's just unbelievable when we say it because it's in some ways it's so incredibly simple and yet so incredibly profound.
Wow.
Deep, right? But that's the pathway that gives us an opportunity to become givers again, because we can only be givers when we're not consumed with ourselves, when we're not overly preoccupied with, our own emotions and our own thoughts, right? And I think as leaders, that's a really, we can do a whole series of episodes on the challenges of being a giver and taker and how quickly we can cross the line between one or the other based on how we're experiencing our situation. But really developing our leadership capacity and maturity is the ability to real time and gain time.
Yeah, that's right.
Which is why we have to practice this stuff offline, like right on our own time, journaling and chatting with close friends and debriefing with trusted people. We have to do the practice so that come game time, we can recalibrate in those moments so that we don't get stuck in a taking posture. And we can return back to being givers where we're ready to show up and bring the best of ourselves to the environment. Wow. Wow. That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for the vulnerability, authenticity. I think that's what we need. We need more of that. We need to hear that, right? Because I think people can relate to that and it may give some of our listeners permission to do this and practice this.
I hope it does.
Yeah, and gosh, wouldn't it be amazing? I would love, if you're listening to this, we want to hear stories. Like, message us. Like, I think all of our emails and stuff is on our websites. Dawn at mpwrcoaching.com, Eric, ERIC at mpwrcoaching.com. And we'd love to hear stories. Like, where are you seeing this stuff impact you? Where is this encouraging you? Where is this inspiring you? Where do you disagree? Where do you feel like, hey, I'm not sure this works. I think you guys are full of crap, whatever. Like, we just want to hear how this is landing on listeners so that we can better serve you guys. All right. Let me just share briefly my own experience with this. I'm going to share again, vulnerably and authentically. Started this business in power coaching years ago with a couple of friends. And it was just a blast for the first, 2-3 years until tensions start to arise, right? Because in any partnership, tensions are going to arise. And we spent so much time and energy trying to resolve some of these conflicts and difference of opinions and perspectives about where the business was going and how we wanted to operate. And there was just so many tensions. And there were so many mistakes I made at the outset of the business that, again, how do you learn? You learn by making mistakes, learning from it, and doing it better the next time. But the point is, through that season, pressure was mounting. Not only the pressure of trying to build a new business, but also now the internal pressure of trying to navigate the complexities that were constantly compounding with these two business partners. And it got to the point where, they made a decision that they felt like these were unresolvable differences and decided that they wanted to part ways. So and the pressure for me internally is just compounding and compounding and compounding. And I am absolutely guilty of having tried various coping mechanisms, forms of medicating against the pain, the stress, the angst of what I was going through, which all led to really unhelpful consequences in my marriage, in my relationship with my kids, and my physical health, my emotional health, my mental health, my relationship with friends. I guarantee you it had an impact on how I was showing up for my clients, which I hate to say, but it's reality. I'm a human being. And it was literally like, because sometimes, these indicators pop up on the dashboard of our life and we kind of go, okay, I'm feeling some stress. I need to deal with it. You deal with it and you move forward. Like in that moment in the podcast.
Exactly.
You were able to navigate it within a few minutes and we moved forward and it was resolved. It was amazing. And it led to a greater outcome. I was in a season of compounding pressure and stress. And it's where I was having to do this like multiple times a day, days on end, weeks on end, months on end. And until we finally, we went our separate ways. And I spent months after that continually processing the stresses that I was experiencing. And I'm so grateful for the work of a great therapist in my life. I'm thankful for my spouse who partnered me incredibly well. I'm grateful for you and some of our team members who were deeply impacted because as you guys were coming into the business and they're transitioning out, it was like, man, just trying to pick up all the pieces. And here's what I want to get to is every day I had to fight against that feeling that you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
I shouldn't be leading a company. I should never have started a company. I'm disqualified. I'm not a good enough person. I'm a train wreck. I'm making mistakes. I made mistakes at the beginning that are now causing everybody all this pain. Right. I just internalized it.
Yeah.
And then as I internalized it and it compounded, I transmitted it. That led to all these consequences. And it took months of continually, regularly practicing the discipline of owning my stress, processing it, identifying those negative narratives or the stories that I was entertaining that were disempowering to me. It's one thing to take personal responsibility for your errors, your mess ups, where you drop the ball, which I've done that my whole life, right? So there's a difference between that and self-loathing, self-condemnation, self-flagellation, right? There's a massive difference between those two.
Yes.
We can own our errors and our mistakes, no matter how big they are, without condemning ourselves, without undermining our sense of identity and self-worth. And that was the battleground for me for months after that whole transition happened. And I'm really grateful for people who understood what I was fighting for and who were committed to partnering me in just the regular practice of owning my stress, processing it, recalibrating my own internal narrative, and over and over and over again choosing, how do I want to show up the best version of me in this situation? And like it eventually, over time, I tell people, it's like, we talked about this, like it was like the marine layer had settled in over my life for like a year and a half. And, a lot of days it was just like survival mode. But I'm so grateful for some of these tools that gave me some practical handles to press through in healthy ways, in productive, constructive ways, that eventually over time led to a little bit of the sun started to break through, the clouds started to dissipate, and eventually I came out on the other side feeling really like I had learned a ton, but feeling really confident in who I am today and who I had become through that difficult process. And again, this is a big dramatic story, but I think it's worth sharing, kind of the momentary one you experience. And then sometimes we need to practice this, with regularity and maybe through seasons of pressure and stress. But here's what I love is what our tools do is they provide people tracks to run on when we don't know what else to do.
That's right.
They just provide simple, clear tracks. If I will just stay in this process, if I'll just stay on this track, I will, there is light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah.
There are breakthroughs available, and I will come out on the other side as a better version of myself. And I think not only did I come out on the other side as a better version of myself, I think our company came out on the other side as a better version of itself.
Yes, I agree.
I wouldn't choose to go back through that, but that's the difference between owning this journey that we're on and the stresses that come with it and growing through it versus the victim villain mentality where we just, put ourselves in this internal prison and waiting for the world to make our lives better.
Ooh. All right. Well, help us understand for our listeners, what are some things we can start to do this week? Obviously, you and I are passionate about this tool, this process, but if our listeners are new to this, what can they do to just start getting familiar, start putting this into practice in their life?
Yeah. The first thing is just real simple. Just the practice of self-awareness, just learning to start an intentional discipline of paying attention to the areas of our life where we feel the greatest amount of stress, no matter what it is. And so I encourage people, and I do this on a regular basis. I use a journal. That's my mechanism, where I regularly write down like what are the 2 or 3 key points of stress that I'm experiencing. And sometimes those are ongoing. Sometimes I wrote it one day and it's gone by the next day. But just learning to identify the indicators, the signals that, hey, I'm under a stress that is disruptive. And then secondly, identifying, okay, some of these are worth processing, right? Some of these we can recognize if these are the top 1 or 2 stress points for me right now, these are worth processing, which by the way, is what we spend most of our time doing with clients, right? And we process them in a simple way, which gives us a chance to recognize what's going on. What am I experiencing? Why am I having such a strong response? Why is this so impactful or disruptive for me personally? Because that helps us own the way we're interpreting the experience and how we're making sense of it, which then clues us into the different narratives and storylines that we're entertaining which at that point, and oftentimes, I'll invite you or my wife or a close friend in to process it with me to help me recognize where those narratives are unhelpful.
Yeah.
And then to choose what's the narrative that is true to myself and that is more empowering. And then from that point, I get to choose, okay, well, then how does the best version of me want to respond to this? How do I want to operate in the midst of whatever this stress is that I'm experiencing, which gives me a chance to choose the version of me that I want to put forward. And so I think for our listeners, like that's actually something we can practically do. Here's what I would say. We're not teaching people something new. This is in our best moments as human beings. This is already how we process life experiences. The problem is you put us under enough pressure and stress, and that pressure short circuits the natural process that our brains want to go through. So all we're doing is illuminating how we process life in our best moments when we're not under too much pressure. That then gives us the handle so that we can go back to those when we're under a lot of pressure to make sure that we're not short circuiting the process.
That's right. That's exactly it. And I just want to remind our listeners as well, and ourselves, that our people don't need us to be perfect. We often sense that that's the case, but our people don't need us to be perfect. They need us to be present. They need us to partner with them.
Mm-hmm.
And the best way that we can do that is to first show up well for ourselves, to take this time to make this space, to do this work so that we can reset when the hits.
I mean, one of the phrases we say all the time is the best thing that we can give to the world around us is a healthier version of ourselves. Right. We're all out to change the world, but sometimes we forget that we've got to change ourselves in the process. To all of our incredible listeners, we love you. We're grateful for the journey that we're on with you. If you know a leader who's struggling with stress right now, send this episode their way. As always, subscribe, like, comment. Let us know what you want us to talk about. What do you want to hear more about? We're all on this journey together. We're all in the same boat. Doesn't matter where we're leading in our life. We're all playing the same game. And how can we develop a competitive advantage? That's how we want to serve you. Don't miss next week, where we're going to be talking about the challenge of feedback. How to give it, how to receive it, and why most leaders, including myself, struggle to do either well.
See you next time.